Okay, best behaviour today because we have someone visiting us to see if she wants to come and do this course potentially.
Sorry, we've already warned her.
You already warned her off, yeah, okay, thank you for that. Okay, so what I want to talk about today, so over the last, what's it now, 8 weeks now, God, this is week 8. The last 8 weeks, yeah I know, 2 more weeks left and then, yeah, time to start working. So in the last 8 weeks we've had a look at what partnerships are, what role partnering plays in project management, and what role I guess you guys as project managers will have in negotiating, managing and facilitating partnerships between private sector bodies, public sector bodies, etc. in order to achieve good business results. What I'm going to move on today is we're talking about evaluating partnerships. So what happens, we've done the negotiating part, we have a decent set of deliverables we want to achieve. We've decided we've partnered with our partnering agency, we're with our collaborating team. At what point do we start evaluating and how do we go about doing that? And you remember from the assessment, the first part of the assessment I'm asking you to do this, I'm asking you to evaluate a partnership, a case study. Okay, so we're going to talk about that today. We'll talk a little bit about why we should evaluate and some methods. And then in the seminar afterwards, I've got some, as promised, I've got some of last year's assessments which I can show you, you can have a look at, some good, some bad, and you can see what kind of report you're expected to produce. And also I'll give you some top tips and talk a little bit about what's good and what's bad, what to do and what not to do. And those of you that were here last semester should know all that already. But we'll go through it again because, Mark, in your work, you didn't all know it properly. Okay, so if you remember rightly, just to frame this right, what you've got to do for your assessment is, part 1, is carry out a critical analysis of the case study, the Coventry City Council case study, by evaluating the strategies adopted by the partners, how did they go about it, and analysing the development of the alliance over time by applying relevant themes, theories and concepts. So when I say themes, theories and concepts, I mean, well, we'll talk about that in the seminar, but I mean the kind of frameworks we've talked about, you know, about like Priest's framework and some of the different methodologies for deciding whether or not a partnership is a good thing to do, etc., etc. I'm also asking you to draw conclusions from your analysis and develop an evaluation of the success or failure of an alliance by applying an evaluation model of your choice. So today we'll talk about some evaluation models, okay? So you can decide what you might apply to that. So we're going to start off, we're going to talk about why we should evaluate partnerships, why that's important, why that's something we need to do, essential. We'll talk a little bit about what potentially is a successful partnership. How do we know? What does success look like? I'm going to introduce some approaches. Okay, so evaluation is a very, very much a neglected part of partnership working. Actually, scratch that. It's a neglected part of all business, all project management, everything. Okay, it's very rare unless it's actually specified or asked for specifically by your funding body or your governing body, that projects are evaluated effectively. Okay, and I taught those guys in this last year, we did that on sustainable development and how evaluation is the most important thing, that we just don't do it. Okay, we get to the end of a project, we think great, we're finished, brilliant, move on. We don't stop and go, well, what worked? What didn't work? How do we go forward? And we make the same mistakes again and again and again. So evaluation is very important, it's absolutely essential. And the role of it, I guess, is to find out what is happening, what's going right, and what's going wrong, and why. And again, it sounds like a no-brainer, but those of you that work at the moment, how many evaluations have you been through that haven't basically done this? It's a tick box exercise, or it's not done at all. Okay? What went wrong? What should we keep on doing? What should we forget about and not make the same mistakes again? And ideally, you need to think about that right at the start. Not at the end of the project, when it's like, oh God, we better start evaluating, we better see if we've succeeded or not. You need to start at the beginning. You need to set the frames of reference of what is a successful partnership before you start. Otherwise, how are you going to know at the end what you need to evaluate? Okay? So you need to think at the start, how will you know if this partnership is successful? Simple question, but it's quite hard to define. So usually it's been an afterthought, and it's very hard to look back and say, okay, was that partnership successful? Okay, well, yeah, we worked together well, okay, yeah, we achieved some success here, we saved a bit of cash. But unless you've got defined criteria, you can't say for sure whether or not you've passed or failed. So we need to have a strategy before we start, an evaluation strategy. How are we going to move forward with this? How, when we get to the end of the project, will we look back? So we need to know why we want an evaluation. Okay? Is it because you want to improve your project for the next time, improve your processes, educate your staff? Is it because your funding body tell you you've got to do an evaluation? Is it because your governing body tell you? Is there some other reason? Because that will define the terms of reference. Who wants the evaluation to be done? Is it your boss? Is it your council leader? Is it your financial manager? Is it your chief executive officer? The reason being, they'll have different criteria, different things they'll expect to see. So we need to know why we're evaluating and who wants to do it, and then when will the evaluation be done. An evaluation doesn't have to take part at the end of a project. In fact, it shouldn't. It should take part all the way through. Okay? In some projects, especially public sector partnering projects, you'll have gateways, is what we call them, gateway stages. And so at the end of a certain point, you'll stop and you'll evaluate and you'll learn and you'll move on. And you'll do that in a regular time. It's a sign-off. Okay? It's something that we have in the Prince 2 methodology, for instance, that you have to sign off before you can move on to the next stage of the project, well, in theory. So we need to know why, who, and when. We also need to know what the evaluation will look at, what questions will be asked, what information and data will be collected, and what criteria and indicators will be used. And the reason we need to know that is, we need to develop ways to collect that data. So if we're saying, well, okay, our evaluation will need to speak to our stakeholders who are out in the community about whether or not our engagement is effective, you need to develop a method to do that, okay? And you need to have that ready, otherwise you'll get to the end of your project or the evaluation point and you won't understand how you can go out and do that, you'll be delaying, you'll be making up as you go along, frankly. So you need to know how the information will be collected. Also, as good project managers, you need to know what resources you need here. Okay? You don't want to get to the end of the project and think, okay, we need to go out and speak to our stakeholders. How many have we got? Oh, about 1,000 people dispersed all around the country. How are we going to get information off them? You know, it's going to cost some money to go out there and interview them or survey them or get some data back for them. So we need to cost that. We need to plan that within the project plan from the start. And this is one of the classic reasons why monitoring and evaluation doesn't take place. We get to the end and we go, actually, we haven't really got the money to go and do that. So we don't bother. We think, well, okay, we'll leave that. It's an add-on, a bolt-on. But it shouldn't be. It should be something that's considered from the start. So just to maybe make it a little bit more clear, we need to find out who's responsible for the evaluation as well. Is it going to be you? Is it going to be a member of your team? Is it going to be a third party? If you're working on a large partnering project, there's a lot of money involved, it may be a good idea to have a third party body do the evaluation for you. Okay? There's a trust issue there. If you evaluate the success of your partnership, how will your partner feel if it's you doing that, etc., and vice versa? Will you do it together, or will you have a third party body that will come in, independent, clean, fresh pair of eyes, and evaluate it for you? This happens a lot in the third sector at the moment. So organisations like Oxfam, for instance, will go and do evaluations on other NGOs, and we do a lot of this at the university. I have some colleagues who work in the geography department who do a lot of evaluation of development projects. So we'll bid for the money and we'll go out and we'll do an evaluation of Oxfam's strategy for water and sanitary in Guinea or something. So we do a lot of that kind of stuff here as third party. The benefit of that is it's independent, you can be a little bit sure that we're not making it up, if you like, and it can be verified. Who will do the evaluation? What staff do you need? What level they're going to be at when you need them? How much will it cost, of course? And how the results of the evaluation will be used. Again, this is critical. I've done a few evaluations myself, and there's nothing worse than writing a report which you know is going to go in a drawer. Okay? It's classic local authority response, isn't it? Yeah? You commission a report, you get the report back, you stick it in a drawer, you don't do anything with it afterwards. So you need to know how the results will be used. Is it going to be used to inform your stakeholders? Are you going to do public meetings? Is it going to go into your corporate information? Is it going to go into your financial information? How will it be used? Because again, that will define on how you present it. So you need to have all of this bottomed out at the very first stage. So why do we evaluate? Well, to learn about how to work in partnership. When we talk about assessment with you guys, we have two kinds of assessment. We have the summative assessment, which is where I sit down and mark your work and give you a 80% for everything, or 40%, or you fail, or whatever. So that's summative assessment. But we also have formative assessment, which is where I'm not marking you, but I'm giving you some advice on your work. I'm saying, yes, the work you're doing so far is really good. I give you a bit of feedback, okay? It's the same with partnering. We need to learn about how to work in partnership. Not just the results. The actual process of evaluation teaches you how to be a better partnership worker. Yeah? We need to measure progress against objectives. Otherwise, how do we know if we've met them? How do we know if we're successful? And we need to improve the management of our processes and procedures. So a lot about evaluation is not just about seeing whether or not you've been successful, it's about improving your processes every time. And that's probably more important actually. So the next time you do a project, you don't make the same mistakes. It's also good to see what has been achieved, both in intentional and unintentional outcomes. Again, this bit's important. There's something that we talk about in project management called unintentional outcomes or unintentional consequences. Sometimes, by the letter of your criteria, your project might fail. Okay? Maybe your project was to create efficiencies in a particular process, and it ends up not really working out. It's not any cheaper. You haven't made any efficiencies. But there may be unintentional outcomes. You may have identified a new process you didn't know existed before. You may have made a new relationship with a new company that you never had before. These are still important. So is the project a failure because you didn't meet your main objective, or is it still, positive? So you need to pay attention to unintentional outcomes. And then finally, improving the effectiveness of partnerships. So again, understanding how you work and also how your partner works. So if you're a large company and you're partnering with another large company and your project doesn't quite work out, your partnership fails by the letter of the word you set out, well, maybe you're learning how to partner with this company. Maybe you'll still partner with them for another project, but you'll go into it better informed because you've evaluated how you work together. So it's extremely important to evaluate. It's good to share experiences with other partnerships, identify good practice, promoting community involvement, for example. So one of the things we have in the public sector is we'll have a repository by, I can't remember who holds it now, it was held by an agency called Partnerships UK, which I don't think exists anymore, and the 4Ps. And they have a database of projects that have happened, partnership projects, with the evaluations, to allow you, if you're setting one up, to go and look through that database and find out what's happened, what was good, what was bad, so you can plan to iron out any mistakes. And it's good to work out how cost effectiveness and value for money. And again, in public sector, we have this key term, value for money, which we have to demonstrate on most projects now. So it's how to work that out, which is difficult. So building up this body of knowledge is important. A couple more, we've got the strengths and weaknesses, to identify the strengths and weaknesses of you, your team, your organisation, your partnering processes, and finally to report to partners, local people, regional and national governments. So again, a key aspect of partnering, again especially in public and third sector, is you have to report publicly your partnership, what happened, what failed, what went right, what went wrong, because it's funded publicly in a lot of cases. So one of the reasons you might evaluate is to enable you to generate that report. Okay. So just touching on what I said before, formative versus summative. Well, the formative assessment is the developmental evaluation, the guidance which puts it back into what you're doing so you can make improvements. So this is really important when you're halfway through or some way through your evaluation, through your partnership. So you're learning what you've done so far and you can make changes before you get to the end. You also want to evaluate the process, of course, which is to evaluate how an intervention works. So for instance, you might have decided to adopt a strategy which you hadn't adopted before. Maybe you decided to partner with a particular company but have them come and work in your office with you. That's quite a common thing we often do. So you'll partner with a company, they'll come and work with you and sit with you as if they were your employees, but they're not. Maybe that's a process you haven't done before. You want to evaluate whether that process works for you or not. And also, of course, probably one of the important ones is the outcome, the final evaluation and the final result of the intervention. So a typical question might be here whether this is in healthcare, whether the intervention has made significant improvements in their client's life. So whatever the main goal of your particular partnering is, this is what you want to evaluate, whether you've met that or not. Okay, so it's often said that partnership or effective partnerships are important at 3 levels. We've got the how, the why, the what, and the when. So how did we do something? So we could look at things like cash, time, management costs. How do we actually go about doing it? And were there any benefits out of that or any impacts that came out of that? So any benefits on community, for instance. We want to look at why. Why did we do something? Was it a commercial initiative? Was it community investment? Did that come up with any extra outputs that were useful, any leverage, any business benefits? We want to look at the what, the cause, the health, inputs, outputs and impacts, and the location. So we're looking at actually what we did. We're looking at what the output was of that specific intervention we did, putting money into it, for instance. And we're looking at the impact on the partnership, whether a community or business or other focused kind of impact. So we need to think about it quite clearly in 3 levels. Okay? But evaluation is hard. It's very, very hard to do a thorough evaluation of a partnership or of anything, to be honest with you. And so what are the problems we've got there? Evaluation really wants to try to make a qualitative problem quantitative. Okay? So it's easy to evaluate things which have hard numbers, of course. So we're evaluating a cost reduction. That's easy. How much did we save? Easy to do. A lot of partnerships are about intangible things, though. Community benefits, or access to markets, or I don't know, goodwill from doing your business, or goodwill with the community. How do you measure that? That's really, really difficult to measure. And how do you benchmark it? So evaluating things like that are really difficult. How do we determine whether or not a partnership is actually functioning? And what do we mean by functioning? How do we address added value? So these are all really fuzzy terms that we use quite a lot. What are you doing a partnership for? We want to create added value within our company. What does added value actually mean? Nobody really knows. So it's difficult unless you can make these very quantitative measures, which in most cases you can't. There's a need to assess these other intangible things such as opportunity costs. So was it worth the investment? Was it worth putting in the time to go forward with this project? The impact of the partnership on individual bodies, the areas of synergy that we've worked with, and the extra areas of achievement. So I guess what I'm trying to say, the main kind of problem with evaluation of any kind is trying to come up with indicators. Robust indicators that say yes or no, that was a success or that was a failure. Difficult but not impossible. Okay, so here's some examples for you what evaluation could focus on. The easy one, you could focus on quantity, outputs, the rate of crime, whether it's got up or down, the partnership between a local authority and I was going to say someone like Group 4 or someone of the security companies, but usually if you use them, your crime will probably go up. They're not the best companies at the moment. So that's quite an easy one to do. Has crime gone up or gone down? Crime has gone down, you could say a successful partnership. But at the same time, the same project, you could also evaluate quality. So, okay, well maybe the quantity hasn't gone down, but outcomes such as reducing the fear of crime and improving quality of life has been improved. So, okay, maybe we don't have less crime, maybe it's broadly the same, but the fear has gone down. So perhaps we've still got a successful project there. And processes, so perhaps again the project didn't work out particularly, crime didn't go up particularly or down, quality was the same. But we came up with a new management system, a new way of working, a new system for partnership working, which is really promising. So perhaps we could take that forward in the future. So you can focus on different levels. And you also need to decide what area that comes from. So is it a bottom-up evaluation? Are we interested in how our customers, our clients, our users, or the residents, the public, how the partnerships worked on them? Are we looking at the end recipient, if you like? Are we looking at our customers? Or are we more interested in looking top-down? So evaluation that convince funders or sponsors that targets are being met. So are we doing this because our bank has asked us to do an evaluation to show that we're using our money effectively in our partnership? And there are two different ways that we could often come at it, and each one will require a different response. Okay, so just a little bit more on this before we look at some tools. So what is a successful partnership? What is it, and how can it be measured? Well, this is something that comes from a book by Hudson and Hardy, New Labour and the Governance of Welfare. And they suggested that there were really 6 features of successful partnerships. It's got a public sector feel. The reason I'm giving you a public sector approach here is because that's what you're doing in your assessment. But it's probably true of most partnerships in general, even private sector ones. So we need to understand, to be successful, that there's a recognition of the acceptance of a need for a partnership approach. So to be successful, we need to understand that a partnership is something that we want. That sounds a bit counterintuitive, but quite often we initiate partnerships not because we want them, but just because we feel that it's something we should be doing, okay? We feel it's an approach we should be taking. So we need to understand that partnering is something that's important and accept that. Successful partnerships will also develop clarity and realism of purpose, so we'll actually have some clear outcomes at the end of it, and we'll ensure there's a commitment and ownership to the actual outcomes that we're looking for, and commitment and ownership to the partnership. Again, this sounds like counterintuitive, you know, a commitment to the partnership. Well, what's the point of actually starting a partnership if we're not committed to seeing it through? Again, from experience, quite often we have a lot of partnerships that have been imposed on groups of people, not necessarily something that you want to do. So we need to build ownership in there. Only then can we be successful. What about develop and maintain trust is an important one. We need to, partners working together. I always use Apple, don't I? Sorry, in case you don't know who those guys are, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. So you have to have trust with your partner that you're going to be working for mutual benefit, and one's not going to stuff the other one, if you like. A successful partnership needs to create clear and robust working arrangements. Our terms of reference need to be very clear. We need to understand the sphere that we're working in, how it works. And the final one, which is what we're interested in here, we need to understand, to be successful, we need to have the ability to monitor, measure and learn from our partnerships. I'm going to look at that in more detail now. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of evaluation models, some ways of thinking about how to approach an evaluation. And then I'm going to touch on a couple of evaluation tools, so some actual physical tools which you can use to apply to a particular case study or partnership to see whether or not they're working, to spit out an answer if you like. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail, but not much, because a lot of that is for you to do for your assessment. And I'll tell you now, there's a wealth of literature on evaluating partnerships out there. There's too much of it. So your problem's going to be deciding which tool to use rather than not being able to find a tool to apply. Hopefully. Okay, so one way to think about evaluating a project or partnership or project, to be honest with you, is to think about it as a life cycle, to adopt a life cycle model. So, yeah. So if we're looking at partnering, okay, we've got the first stage, I guess, which is trying to decide whether or not what opportunities we have, that we want to actually partner. What is it we're trying to do? Are we trying to partner for a particular service? We're trying to apply to get into a market, for efficiencies, for instance, for better service. We start to look at our partners, okay, who qualifies, who could we partner with, who has the required knowledge that we need in order to deliver this project. We have our alliance forming and planning, trying to understand how we're going to take that forward, how we're going to negotiate terms, talking to our partners, deciding who we're going to partner with, finally, what our terms of reference will be. We can look at our negotiation and agreement, negotiating the contract, those big contracts that I showed you a couple of weeks ago, understanding what we have, our terms of reference, our frameworks, how our benefits will be shared, how our risk will be shared. We have implementing the project, the partnership, getting off the ground, starting, ensuring that it works, managing it, and then the transition at the other end back out of our partnering and into a new one if that's what we do. So of course you're going to apply your evaluation at any point on this. So you might have a project that evaluates how the negotiation start of our project went, one that looks at how our management of it went, or you can have an evaluation that looks at every stage. Okay? And it's up to you, I guess, to determine the terms of reference. It will determine, this is where we go back to the strategy stage. Is it from your, is it your bank that's interested? They might be interested in this part here. Is it your boss who's interested in this part here? So depending on the type of evaluation you do will depend on what you want to get out of it. So we can think of the partnerships going through a series of stages and which tactics for evaluation are appropriate for each stage. So we've got entering the partnership again, managing the partnership, and exiting. Don't know why you can't see that properly. It doesn't say anything important, does it? No. So again, it's just where would you apply the evaluation? Would you apply it at all these levels, or would you apply it just at one of these particular ones? And one of the approaches that comes out in the literature is the 5 vital stages approach. And this talks about when we're running a project, when we're running a partnership, we have the, it's a bit like, some of you come across Tuckman's model of team working. Yeah, some of you might have, if you haven't, you will do next year or semester for you guys who are doing it part-time, because we do that in human resource management and other modules. So one of the first things we have is forming. When your alliance is forming, it's starting to take hold, you're starting to work out how people get together, and you've got this high kind of expectations that your project's going to be fantastic, your partnership's going to be brilliant, it's all going to work. And then you dip down towards failure when you start to kind of lose interest and you realise that things are quite working the way they should, and they never do. And then you work through that and you work with your partners to kind of understand what's going wrong and put in some measures to make it work a little bit better. And you move back into functioning. That's when your partnership is actually working very well. You're achieving the outputs, you're working together with your partner. It's a good marriage, and you're both benefiting from what's happening there. And then that can move on to one of 2 stages, either flying, brilliant, everything's working brilliantly, or fail, okay? And we need to understand when we evaluate what's happening at each of these stages in the 5 stages approach. So just take that a few steps further. So the first stage, when we're forming, again, a bit like when you're forming a team and you're starting on project work, you're building consensus, you're understanding your terms of reference, who does what, common terms, common analogies, you're setting your vision and your objectives. Then the problems start to set in and you refocus or go to step 5. If you don't refocus, you fail. So this is when you start to think about, okay, what do we do now? Stage 3, you're up and running, you're functioning. Stage 4, your real achievement. Stage 5 is a recognition that all partnerships have a shelf life. All partnerships will ultimately either succeed or fail, but most of them will actually have an ending and actually tail off, if you like. As a partner, you need to work through these 5 stages in order to function with the greatest effectiveness or fly. Every partnership goes through these stages, okay? All of the academic literature tells us that pretty much every single one will go through each part of that phase. Sometimes in a different order, but they will always move towards failing and then move towards re-evaluating and then probably fly at some point. So even in the best partnerships, there's a tendency for partnerships to falter and fail. So unless the partners consciously manage the progress through the life cycle, then that's what's going to happen. So again, it's making another case for why we need to evaluate every stage of this life cycle to make sure that we're successful. One of the most interesting things is people don't often know when a partnership has outgrown its usefulness. Keep coming back to public sector, but again, there's a lot of partnerships that are still out there which aren't really working very well, but are still partnerships because they've always been partnerships. Does that make sense? A bit like a marriage, you keep on with your partner even though you know it's failing because it's what you've always done, and what else are you going to do? So there's a lot of partnerships that work in that way. So evaluation can help you understand when your project is starting to use its usefulness. Because if not, what you have is partnership fatigue and partnership proliferation. What I mean by that is you have lots of partnerships working within your organisation, many of which aren't really working, they're just there because they're historical. New staff come in, they don't really understand, and you've got a non-functioning organisation. And a note of caution, partnerships are all context specific and they come in all shapes and sizes. So when I'm talking about models, not all of them will fit, okay? The 5 vital stages one fits most partnerships, almost all of them, but all of these stuff I'm talking about, there's no one solution fits all. So when we're looking at your case studies, you have to find an evaluation method that is appropriate for your case study, okay? So, and you need to justify that. We'll talk about that in the seminar. So not just plucking an evaluation model and applying it, actually telling me why that model is appropriate for your particular case study in this case. Okay, there was so much information out there, as I said, I didn't want to go through all of it, we haven't got the time. But what I've done in this particular, take a pause now, I've given you some resources which are available to you. Local Partnerships, which is the new name for Partnerships UK, or the 4Ps, which is the local government one. And that's where you find all the information on different tools and different partnerships. Partnership Brokers, which are a third-party company that does a lot of evaluation. We've got a lot of literature on there. Scottish Government, for some reason, have a very good partnering, a very good lot of information. Oxfam and the International Institute for Sustainable Development. These are live links which you can explore in your own time, which will give you a lot more information on the models. So, what would you expect to see from a good evaluation? Well, we need to measurement against progress. So maybe it's a funder's criteria, maybe it's performance targets. We need to measurement of that progress against partner's own targets. So what I'm talking about here is external targets. Often this will come from your funder, your bank, or from your project sponsor, from the government, if you're working in a local government. And then your internal targets. Your own project, your own managers will have their own internal targets, and they're both valid, but they both need monitoring. So you need to think of them both. When we also might like to see an assessment of our value for money and effectiveness, a more qualitative discussion of the health of the partnership, how it's actually working, how well do partners work together, and progress indicators, involvement, accountability, transparency. So these are some of the things that you might see in an evaluation. So financial stuff, a bit of qualitative stuff about fuzzy stuff about how we're working, a bit of hard stuff about whether or not we've met our objectives. And there was a number of tools you can apply to help you do this, which we'll look at now. But always remember, tools are just that. They're not a solution, they're just something you can apply to try and get an answer. So, as I touched on last week, a couple of weeks ago, we have some very generic tools. So these aren't specific for partnering, but they're just decent tools you can use anywhere. And most of you have done SWOT analyses before, and we did a SWOT analysis on a couple of the case studies that we looked at. So very useful, very quick, very dirty. You should do a SWOT analysis for every single thing that you do. I always say that to people, people think I'm mad, but you should do. After every assessment you get back, do a SWOT analysis. What was good about it? What was bad about it? What's my feedback? Okay, and then work out, if I said your weakness is your academic writing, well, there you go, that's what you need to work on. If I said your strength was your use of literature, forget about it, you're fine with that, you don't need to work on that. So you should do a SWOT analysis for pretty much every assessment you do, every project you do, every part of a project you do, as part of your continuous learning. So one approach you could do to evaluating a partnership or your case study would be just apply a simple SWOT analysis. What were the strengths of this partnership, what were the weaknesses, what were the opportunities, what were the threats. It's a very basic tool, but you could do that if you want to be basic. We've also got PESTLE analysis. Have you guys come across this before, Samin? It's another situational management tool that's used a lot in management in general to try to understand the strategy, the context that you're working in. And you can do this for anything pretty much, and you can do this for a case study. So you could look at, for instance, for the study you're looking at, what were the political influences, successes, failures of the project, what were the economic successes or failures, from a social point of view, did it help the community, from a technological point of view, were there any technological problems with this particular project, look at the legal ramifications and the environment that you work in. So again, you could apply a PESTLE analysis. Again, it's a very simple, blunt instrument, very simple tool, but it's something you could do. There are some more specific tools. This one again is not specific to partnering, but it's specific, it's a little bit more detailed than the other two. So this is balanced scorecard. Has anyone come across this one? Okay, this is an approach that came in the late 1990s, Kaplan and Norton, the academics who designed it. And what they suggest is that we need some way to translate vision into operational goals. And they came up with this kind of balanced scorecard which says for the success of any project or any business endeavour, or any endeavour, we need to have these four kind of criteria, and it needs to be balanced, okay? So if you have a project, for instance, that is very good financially, that might fail if it's not good strategically, etc., etc. What they said was, first off, we need to translate the vision of the endeavour, whether that's a process, a project, a partnership, for instance, and we need to find a way to process that into actual outcomes. The way we do that is by communicating and linking and educating, setting goals, linking to rewards and performance measures. So we're actually setting in place the measures we can do to understand that the vision is actually working. We need to plan, we need to set targets, we need to have strategic initiatives, allocate resources, establish milestones for when we're going to stop and look at what we're doing to see if it's effectiveness. And we need to bring that back into feedback and learning. So how strategically have we worked? We need to put that back into the vision, we need to facilitate strategy again. And this is an ongoing cycle. And the balanced scorecard says that you need to have an equal effort in each of these areas in order to be successful. So, balanced scorecard can work for anything. In this case, we're looking at financial information, customer information, learning and growth, and business processes. You could have one that looks at social sustainability, environmental sustainability, etc., etc., economic sustainability, community engagement, for instance. You can set these up any way you like, but the point is you have to set the criteria which you can then use to evaluate your project. So essentially what it's about is about the identification of a small number of financial and non-financial measures and attaching targets to them. So that when you review them, you can determine whether current performance meets your expectation. And the idea is that this will alert you as a manager where if any of your performance is deviating. Okay? So if you're doing really well in your financial information but your customer engagement isn't very good, and it allows you to then steer your project towards success away from failure, if you like. So it's a very quick tool again to develop an evaluation of how you're actually achieving your goals or whether you're achieving your particular partnership. To give you an example, you can just about read some of that. This is from an evaluation of a crime partnership in Sweden, I believe, yeah. Swedish law around drunk driving. And it was a partnership to try and reduce drink driving in Sweden. And what they came up with was a balanced scorecard looking at a range of success factors, and if these success factors were met, they know they'd met the project outcomes. And balanced scorecard says that all 4 of these have to be met in order to be successful. So they looked at their success factors, so they looked at road traffic safety, public order, drug crime and crime investigation. They came up with the goals, which were to discover drunk drivers, increase safety, direct operations against drug crime and subsidise criminal departments. They looked at how they knew that those would be successful or not, number of breathalyzers per month, number of resource hours per month put into that, number of drug crimes, number of cases per month for that one. They had a traffic light system, which is common again in balanced scorecard. So basically saying if we have less than 200 people breathalyzed, sorry, more than 200 people breathalyzed, we've got a green, we're achieving our targets. If we have less than 100, it's red, we're not achieving our targets, etc., etc., etc. And then you have your methodology. Okay, so in case of breathalyzers, we'll have direct controls, we'll have people there on the street, if you like, we'll have people putting people over. So basically what you're looking for is your factors, your goals, your indicators, how you're going to measure it, and your methodology. So this would be how you would evaluate also, how you would develop an evaluation tool or balanced scorecard. It's also used a lot in UK public policy. The case study I've got here, which is on Blackboard, is looking at the neighbourhood renewal unit, which doesn't exist anymore, for local strategic partnerships, which don't exist anymore, to self-assess against a set of criteria. So they were looking at their strategy and their action focus, efficiency, their inclusiveness, and their performance management. And again, their scorecard had these traffic light systems. So you could very quickly go through and say, okay, where are we in terms of inclusiveness, where are we in terms of learning, where are we in terms of strategy, and it would give you a green, amber or red depending on how you were doing. So in this case, a green assessment, you've got successful delivery, amber is mostly successful, but there are strategies in place to improve, amber, red, little evidence of success, red, no evidence of success. In that case, you might kill your partnership or think about redoing something. So we have this traffic light assessment, which is quite common for evaluation. And a couple of very quick ones just to show you. You have to dig this information out yourself from the references. There's this one called Smarter Partnerships, which was developed about 10 years ago now. Very similar to Balanced Scorecard. It's saying that to be an effective partnership, to evaluate you as being effective, we need to look at leadership. Our partners share a common vision. They harness their energies to achieve more than they could on their own, which is, of course, why you partnership in the first place, to achieve more than you could on your own. Look at trust, where partners are mutually accountable, share risks, and support each other. Looking at learning, where partners continuously seek to improve what they're doing. And to look at managing for performance, where partners put in place the necessary practices to manage change effectively. And again, you can go into an organisation, develop some indicators around these, and assess whether or not they're meeting these evaluation criteria. And the final one is another one which comes from the Audit Commission, where they looked at they're called the partnership wheel. And again, this looks at partnership working, which is set out in the hub: probity, performance, and participation. Participation means openness and full involvement of your community partners. Performance means a clarity of purpose and efficient delivery, and probity means the systems to make use of resources, so such as financial management, for instance. And again, you can come in and you can review and monitor it based on those frameworks, those different kind of ways of working. So a little bit of a summary, I guess. So there are many approaches. There are hundreds of approaches now out there. There are generic ones, such as SWOT and PESTLE, for instance. There are more bespoke ones. Some projects will develop their own evaluation tools which are specific just for that one project, such as the project I worked on, which I showed you. They can be top-down and bottom-up. And what you need to do for your assessment is research evaluation tools for yourself. So you could use any one of those I've shown you, or you could find your own evaluation tool which you found somewhere which has a robust methodology and use that. Like anything in academia, you make more points for being original. Okay, so you find an evaluation tool which we haven't given you, you make more points out of it if you like. But there's nothing wrong with using the ones I've given you either. Okay, it's how you apply it which is important as well. Okay, so just to quickly summarize, we've looked at some of the reasons why we should evaluate partnerships, and hopefully you've got an idea of why it's really important to do so, although it's difficult. We've looked a little bit at what might make a successful partnership and how we can measure that, and I've introduced you very quickly to a couple of approaches and toolkits that are out there. It's for you to go and find those in more detail. And again, I've got some links for you here which will help you quite a lot. This one in particular has got quite a lot of different methodologies on there, so that's for you to find. Okay, so what we're going to do in the seminar in 10 minutes time, whatever it is I'm going to go through some top tips for the assessment. Okay, so you guys are the ones that are going to win because the other guys aren't here. So I'll take you through some top tips, good what to do and not what to do, and what I expect to see. And I'm going to show you some examples from last year, which is actually the same case study. I thought it was a different case study, but it's the same one. You can't take those away with you, but you can have a look so you at least get a feel. I always think that you can never write an assessment report unless you've seen what one looks like, can you? So just by having a look through, hopefully you'll get an idea of what we expect. It'll be particularly useful for those of you that are new this year. Okay? Cool. I'll see you in the seminar. You coming to the seminar? You're welcome to, shall I?
I didn't realise it was on, but I just wanted to go and thank you.
No problem. So you're thinking about doing this potentially at some point?
I am, yeah, in September.
So what are you doing now?
I work as a partnership coordinator.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
In Norton, it's in a charity.
Yeah. Before I worked here, I worked in
Oh, sure.
Do you think about doing the project management work?
So that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Did you get my name, Alex?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Yes, I'm the admissions student for this as well.
Oh, right, okay.
But only, I'm actually moving, I'm leaving at the end of April.
Yeah.
There'll be someone taking over. So if you need anything, just send me an email.
Thank you.
We can sometimes help with putting the case as well.
Yeah, great.
So yeah, so let us know if there's anything you need. Send me an email or one of our colleagues, even if it's after they ask for it.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah. Feel free, anything you want to know. So. It's not always just us standing and talking at you, by the way.
Right.
Seminars are more interesting, aren't they?
Yes.